Margaret Davies had lived 73 years with grace and quiet dignity. Her silver hair, swept elegantly back, framed a face that still held traces of the beauty that had once turned heads. Tonight, as she prepared dinner in her modest, but comfortable home, she couldn't help but smile at the thought of her son David's visit. David was her only child, the light of her life since his father passed 12 years ago. At 45, he built a successful career as an architect, married a lovely woman named Christine, and seemed to have everything figured out. Margaret had spent her life savings carefully, living on her pension and the life insurance money her late husband Thomas had left her. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to maintain her independence and dignity. The doorbell chimed at exactly 6 o'clock. David was always punctual. "Mom," he said, embracing her warmly as he stepped inside, Christine following close behind. His dark hair had started graying at the temples, making him look distinguished in his tailored suit. Christine, blonde and polished in her designer dress, offered a tight smile. Come in," Margaret said, her voice warm with affection. "Dinner's almost ready. I made your favorite pot roast." Over dinner, they made small talk about David's latest project, Christine's yoga classes, and the changing neighborhood. Then David cleared his throat, setting down his fork with deliberate care. Margaret noticed the glance he exchanged with Christine, something she'd learned to read after years of motherhood. "Mom, we need to talk about something important," David began, his voice taking on that serious tone he used in business meetings. "Christine and I have been thinking about your situation here." Margaret's hand stilled on her water glass. "My situation? You're getting older," Christine interjected smoothly. "Living alone in this big house, managing your finances, all those bills and decisions. It's a lot for someone your age." David leaned forward, his expression earnest. "We want to help you, Mom. Starting next month, we think it would be better if we transferred your accounts to my name. That way, I can manage everything for you. You won't have to worry about a thing." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Margaret looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw something that made her heart ache. This wasn't concern in his eyes. It was calculation. "See," she said softly, her mind working quickly behind her calm exterior. "And I suppose you've already made arrangements?" "Well, yes," David said, seeming relieved by her apparent acceptance. "We can go to the bank next week and sign the papers. It's really for the best, Mom. You'll see." Margaret smiled then, a gentle, knowing smile that had weathered decades of life surprises. "Of course, dear, whatever you think is best." She served dessert, her famous apple pie, and listened to them discuss their upcoming vacation to the Bahamas. They didn't notice how quiet she'd become, how thoughtful. They didn't see the wheels turning behind her kind eyes. After they left, Margaret sat in her husband's old armchair and thought about Thomas. He'd been a wise man, always prepared for possibilities others never considered. She thought about the safety deposit box he'd insisted she keep, the one David didn't know about. She thought about old friends, and about loyalty, and about what it meant to truly care for someone versus simply wanting to control them. The next morning, Margaret called her lawyer, Richard Morrison, a man she'd known since his own mother had been her bridge partner 30 years ago. "Richard, dear," she said, "I need to discuss some estate planning." Rather urgently. 3 weeks later, David and Christine arrived for their usual Sunday dinner, chattering about their plans to visit the bank the following Tuesday. Margaret served them roasted chicken with herbs from her garden, moving around her kitchen with the practiced grace of someone who'd been feeding people she loved for half a century. "Mom, starting next month, we'll transfer all your money to my account," David announced cheerfully, reaching for another roll. "That way, I can manage everything properly. You won't have to worry about bills or expenses or anything." Margaret set down her serving spoon very carefully. "My son said that," she repeated slowly, her voice steady. "And I just smiled." David and Christine exchanged confused glances. That night, Margaret continued, her blue eyes clear and direct. "As always, you came with your wife for a free dinner." She paused, letting the words settle. "But when you walked into my house tonight, Both of you screamed in shock. "Mom, what are you?" David started, but Margaret raised a gentle hand. "You see, my dears, I may be 73, but I'm neither senile nor helpless. After our last conversation, I did some thinking. I called my lawyer, my financial advisor, and had a long talk with your father's old partner at the firm. You remember Harold? He's been very helpful." She walked to the sideboard and picked up a folder, placing it on the table between them. "These are the papers showing that as of 2 weeks ago, I transferred the bulk of my assets into an irrevocable trust. The house will be donated to the local women's shelter after I pass. My remaining funds will support scholarships for single mothers pursuing education. I've kept enough in a separate account to maintain my independence and dignity for the rest of my days." David's face had gone white. "You can't do that. That money was supposed to be mine," Margaret finished quietly. "Yes, David, it was mine. Your father and I worked for 47 years to build our life. He wanted me cared for, not controlled." Christine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. We were trying to help you." Margaret's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the gentleness now. "Help me, or help yourselves to a vacation fund. I heard you talking last time, after you thought I'd gone to bed. The Bahamas, the new car, the kitchen renovation. You'd spent my money in your minds before you'd even gotten it." David's mouth opened and closed. Mom, I'm your son." "Yes," Margaret said. And now, there was sorrow in her voice, real and deep. "You are my son, and I loved you enough to give you everything I could when you were growing up. I loved you enough to support you through college, to help with your wedding, to babysit whenever you needed. I loved you enough to never ask for anything in return." She sat down across from them, her hands folded on the table. "But love, real love, doesn't mean letting someone take advantage. Your father taught me that. He used to say, 'Margaret, being kind doesn't mean being foolish.' So what now?" Christine asked bitterly. "We're just supposed to accept this? You're supposed to understand something," Margaret said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not cutting you off out of spite, David. You have a good job, a beautiful home. You don't need my money. But those women at the shelter? The ones trying to escape abuse and build new lives? The single mothers working 2 jobs and dreaming of education? They need it. They need it the way I needed help when your father got sick and I didn't know how we'd manage." She reached across the table, her aged hand covering her son's. "I'm giving you something more valuable than money, David. I'm giving you the chance to learn what your father spent a lifetime trying to teach you. That wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in how you treat people when you have power over them." Tears had started rolling down David's cheeks. Whether they were tears of shame or anger or grief, Margaret couldn't tell. "Maybe all 3. There's still Sunday dinners," she said gently. "If you want them. There's still your mother who loves you, but there won't be an inheritance beyond what I've chosen to give. And David," she squeezed his hand, "that might be the greatest gift I can give you now." Christine grabbed her purse and stormed out. After a long moment, David stood too. At the door, he turned back. His mother stood in the soft light of her living room, dignified and unbowed, surrounded by 50 years of family photographs and memories. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this," he said, his voice breaking. Margaret smiled sadly. "I know, but someday, I hope you'll thank me." After he left, Margaret returned to her armchair, Thomas's armchair, and looked at the old wedding photograph on the mantel. "I did it right, didn't I?" she whispered. In the silence, she could almost hear his answer. "You always do, my love." 6 months passed. Margaret heard through mutual friends that David and Christine had separated. Apparently, Christine had been having an affair with David's business partner, and the stress of losing the expected inheritance had exposed cracks that were already there. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the doorbell rang. Margaret opened it to find David standing there, alone, holding a pot of yellow roses. "They were always your favorite," he said quietly. "They still are," she replied, stepping aside to let him in. They sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee in comfortable silence. For a while, finally, David spoke. "I've been seeing a therapist. trying to understand how I became someone who would. He couldn't finish. Someone who would prioritize money over his mother? Margaret offered gently. Yes. He looked at her, then, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it. For not seeing you as a person with your own life and dignity. For seeing you as just someone to manage. Margaret reached across and took his hand. Apology accepted. That's it? David asked, surprised. That's it, she confirmed. Because that's what love does, David. Real love. It holds people accountable and still keeps the door open. It's firm and forgiving all at once. David spent the afternoon helping her plant new flowers in the garden. They talked about his father, about memories of David's childhood, about the kind of man David wanted to become. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, Margaret watched her son work beside her and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Mom, David said, brushing dirt from his hands. Would it be okay if I came back next Sunday? Just to visit? No agenda, no asking for anything. Just to be with you? Margaret smiled. The kind of smile that had comforted scraped knees and broken hearts. The kind that had celebrated first words and graduation days. I'd like that very much. In the end, Margaret Davies learned something her 73 years hadn't quite taught her yet. That sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no. That protecting yourself doesn't mean you've stopped caring. And that true family isn't about obligation or inheritance or keeping up appearances. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. It's about choosing, every single day, to see each other as human, flawed, complicated, worthy of grace, and deserving of truth. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's about silver-haired women with steel spines and tender hearts, who love their children enough to teach them one final lesson, that the best things in life can't be transferred to anyone's account. They can only be earned.